In the last two videos, I talked about the new Dolby Atmos features in the newly released Harrison MixBus 10 and how incredibly easy it is in MixBus to convert a stereo session into a Dolby Atmos session. If you're interested in these videos, I'll leave links in the description. I recommend checking them out. However, there are two other features of MixBus 10 that I think are very significant for anybody who wants to work with spatial audio, particularly Dolby Atmos, and nobody seems to talk about them. Therefore, I felt I needed to make a third video about the use of MixBus 10 in spatial audio production. So here we go. Two remarkable features of MixBus 10 that go almost completely unnoticed. Let's have a look. The first feature I want to discuss is something that has actually been around for a long time, the ability to use post-fader inserts in MixBus. Now this is significant because it substantially increases the usability of the Dolby Atmos Composer in MixBus. And in case you have never heard of the Dolby Atmos Composer, it is a plugin developed by Fiedler Audio that allows users of almost any digital audio workstation to work in Dolby Atmos, and that also includes MixBus. Best of all, the Dolby Atmos Composer comes in two versions, and the entry-level version is completely free. You just need to go to Fiedler Audio and download it, and you're ready to go. I should mention that it works both on Windows as well as macOS, and that I've made a couple of videos about the Dolby Atmos Composer in the past. I'm going to leave some links in the description if you want to check them out. To get things started, I'd like to play a clip from our most recent episode of our podcast Spatial Audio Monthly. And this episode, we talked with Thomas Fiedler, the developer of the Dolby Atmos Composer. And this is what Thomas had to say about immersive audio in MixBus 10.
Regarding MixBus, I only saw the one video. I didn't download and play around with it myself. I saw that it is, according to the video, very limited. Of course, it's very easy. You switch on, and then you have your panners where you can fly around with your objects, and then that goes somehow magically to the Atmos file. And I think on the one hand, it's quite limiting because if you want to go into details in your mixing, then you quickly get to the limits of that. On the other hand, it's a statement which I find rather interesting because Atmos should be easy. It should become easy. If people start making Atmos in their homes and sharing it with their friends, it really helps to get the Atmos experience across to the consumers, because that's another thing. I mean, if you look, I mean, Apple boasts 90% of our listeners listen to Dolby Atmos or something like that, but they don't know. They hear it, they like the music, maybe, but they don't know that internally the algorithms, if they hear with headphones, they just switched over to Atmos by default. There's an Atmos version of the mix available, but they don't notice. So people also have to be educated to actually hear what's the difference, and also the mixes have to get to the point where there are truly a difference compared to the stereo mixes. So if you want to do something serious on MixBus, you still need the Dolby Atmos Composer.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the things that I like about that approach, because it is very low entry barrier. So it's very easy to push that button, and then essentially you start playing around with it, and then you start to realize the limitations, and that's the moment where you think about what can I do in addition to that, right? So it's not like this huge thing that I need to familiarize myself with. I can just kind of switch it on, and if I don't like it, I switch it off again. And if I switch it off, essentially everything comes back to the way it was before, so you didn't destroy anything. So I find that, and then essentially comes the moment where you see, I need the Dolby Atmos Composer, because that actually works in MixBus. So you can so for those MixBus users out there, if you're not happy with the way kind of Atmos is implemented on MixBus, the Dolby Atmos Composer works on MixBus. You can use that one. As mentioned before, this clip was taken from the most recent episode of our podcast, Spatial Audio Monthly, where we discuss all things spatial and immersive audio. In this particular episode, we had a fascinating discussion with Thomas Fiedler about the Dolby Atmos Composer, its origins, and its potential future developments. If you have any interest in spatial immersive audio production, you should check out that podcast and subscribe. We publish one episode per month and always feature interesting guests who can provide expert insights into this topic. But let's return to MixBus 10. Why does the Dolby Atmos Composer work so well with MixBus? And what do post-fader inserts have to do with that? Let's explore that further. So what I have here is the same session that I also used in my previous two videos. Let's just listen. And as I said in my previous videos, in order to turn that into Dolby Atmos, that is actually fairly straightforward. So let me just loop that thing here. And if I want to turn that into Dolby Atmos, all I really need to do is need to go into the session settings and then simply kind of enable immersive panning. And that would then essentially add the Dolby Atmos mix bus or the Dolby Atmos master bus. But this has some disadvantages, and one of the disadvantages is that it does not allow me to use Dolby Atmos bed tracks. And if I want to use bed tracks, I need a different solution, and one of those solutions is the Dolby Atmos Composer. So let me just stop the audio for a second and let's turn that back into a regular stereo session. And in order to do that, all I really need to do is need to disable immersive panning. It will come up with a warning window that essentially will remove certain things. And yes, it's going to be okay. I think the only thing I need to do is I need to re-enable the stereo bus because that is still muted if I turned it off. So everything now should work. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to use the Dolby Atmos Composer instead of the internal Dolby Atmos rendering within MixBus. And to do that, there are really two things I need to do. First of all, the Dolby Atmos Composer comes as a plugin that renders the Dolby Atmos, and then you have additional routing plugins that take in the individual tracks and route them into the Dolby Atmos Composer. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to actually add the Dolby Atmos Composer plugin to our project or to our session, and the way to do that is to do that best on the master bus, really. So I'm going to add the Fiedler Audio, where are we? Fiedler Audio Dolby Atmos Composer. I'm going to use VST3, doesn't make any difference. And this then adds the Dolby Atmos Composer. And if you've worked with Dolby Atmos before, you recognize the layout here. You have the 128 channels that are in a Dolby Atmos master file, and you have the 10 bed channels here as well. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about how exactly that works. If you're interested in the details about what this composer can do, once again, I invite you to watch one of my previous videos. Here, I'm just going to show you why this is so convenient to use in MixBus. Now, in order to add a track to our Dolby Atmos mix, what we would need to do is we need to route the track into the Dolby Atmos Composer, and the way this is done is by adding a routing plugin to the track. So I'm going to add one to the first audio track here. And this, once again, Fiedler Composer, Fiedler Audio. And this routing plugin is called the Dolby Atmos Beam plugin. Once again, I'm using the VST3 version of the Beam plugin. And that Beam plugin will then take the audio and will route it into the Dolby Atmos Composer. So if I'm opening up the Dolby Atmos Composer, I now see that the Dolby Atmos Composer has recognized that there is a Beam plugin in my project or in my session. And it's taking in the audio from that plugin, and it's essentially mixing it into the Dolby Atmos composition, and by default it's going to use a bed. And one of the nice things about the Dolby Atmos Composer is that these bed tracks or these bed tracks can actually have more than 10 channels. So the Fiedler Audio Composer uses something that is called composites. We see here in the Panmon composite, and these composites are expanded bed tracks, really. That's what they are. And if I now play the audio, I should essentially hear everything through the Dolby Atmos Composer. And I'm currently only hearing the first track because the other tracks are muted. They are not really sent into the Dolby Atmos Composer, and I can now move the audio object. And I should probably loop the track. So let me go back to let's loop that here. And I can now change the position of these objects and what that will essentially do. So let's select one here. It will essentially send the appropriate audio into the individual bed channels. So let's, for example, change the size of those objects. And let's reset that. Let's set objects to 9.1.6. So I can change the spread, and that will essentially send more audio into the surrounding channels of the Dolby Atmos bed. And I can also turn that into an object. The only thing I need to do here is in the pan mode, I need to change the two objects. And that will essentially kind of change the two objects 11 and 12. And that's really everything that needs to be done. Now, why is Mixbus so useful for that? And that is because of the following. This Beam plugin is currently a post-fader insert, which means that the fader comes first and then the Beam plugin is inserted after that. In a regular digital audio workstation, what will happen is that the Dolby Atmos Beam plugin is ahead or in front of the fader. And that essentially means that because the audio is now sent from the Beam plugin into the Dolby Atmos Composer, it bypasses the fader completely. So if I'm now changing the fader, I don't have any effect on the audio whatsoever. And that is a little bit annoying. That means that you need to be a little bit creative in how you set these projects up. What's usually done is that you either don't work with the fader at all and use the fader or the volume version or the volume knob in the Beam plugin, or you can also work with buses and essentially kind of put the Dolby Atmos Beam plugin on a bus and use the fader of the original track that way. But in Mixbus, this is actually very straightforward to do. All you really need to do is you need to put the Dolby Atmos Beam plugin after the fader, and once you've done that, you can use the fader in the way you're used to use it, and that is super convenient. So the fact that Mixbus has these post-fader inserts makes the use of the Dolby Atmos Composer extremely convenient. So let's add Beam plugins to the other two tracks as well. So as we're adding these Beam plugins, the additional tracks are now coming in. And let's maybe turn the first track, which was the pad, into a composite. And if I now look at the Dolby Atmos Composer, I have everything into the bed right now, so I need to turn that into objects as well. So let's just turn the second track into an object, the third track into an object. So I now have a Dolby Atmos bed, which is a 16-channel bed, 9.1.6. I have two objects with two stereo objects, so technically 4 objects. And everything is run into the Dolby Atmos Composer, and that way you can create very easily full Dolby Atmos, including Atmos beds in Mixbus. Now if you want to export that, let me stop the audio here. If you want to export that, the export works a little bit differently because essentially you need to export it through the Dolby Atmos Composer. It's still relatively simple to do, but it's not as straightforward as it is with Mixbus itself. And if you want to monitor everything with a more advanced monitoring system, so for example, you have a 7.1.4 speaker layout in your studio, you can do that by sending the output of the Dolby Atmos Composer in an internal output, in an external output, and that way you can use your 7.1.4 studio environment with the Dolby Atmos Composer, even though Mixbus is only a stereo DAW. Now there's one additional thing that I just wanted to show off because I found that really interesting. It's a little bit of a gimmick, but you know, kind of what would we be without gimmicks? So let me go back into and let's play that again. Let's loop that again. The interesting thing is, because the Dolby Atmos Composer essentially works on the stereo session of that particular track, I can actually add the immersive panning as well. So what I can actually do is I can have two the Atmos versions, one with a bed through the Dolby Atmos Composer, which is currently here on the stereo bus. If I'm muting the Dolby Atmos, the immersive bus, and I am re-enabling the stereo bus, this is the output of the Dolby Atmos Composer. And at the same time, I can also monitor that with the output through the immersive bus of MixBus. Now, why would you use that? I honestly don't know. I just found that to be interesting. What you could do, for example, is you could check if your setup with the MixBus itself, where you essentially kind of work around the bed tracks, is as good as if you would use something that uses actually Dolby Atmos bed. So maybe that's one way to use that. Now, if I now want to monitor everything just in stereo and disable the Dolby Atmos Composer, I can do that as well. Let me just play the audio again. And let's loop that again. And so I'm currently listening to the immersive output of MixBus. Let's open up, or let's enable the, this is the output from the Dolby Atmos Composer. And if I disable the Dolby Atmos Composer, I now have the stereo. I think that's really cool. So essentially I have the stereo version, I have one Atmos version with a bed and one Atmos version without a bed, and I can switch back and forth between them almost seamlessly. And that I think is really, really cool. But so much to the Dolby Atmos Composer. Let's check out one additional feature that I think is really remarkable. Before I continue, a quick reminder, if you have enjoyed this video so far, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions or comments, please either use the comment section below or join us on our Discord server. The invite link is in the description. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by becoming a member either through YouTube or Patreon. There's also a free membership option on Patreon. And you can also use the affiliate links below or buy some of my in Immersion We Find Presence merch, like this very, very comfortable pillow, for example. All contributions to this channel are used to purchase the software and hardware I talk about on this channel. And with that being said, let's now turn our attention to the second feature that goes almost unnoticed. MixBus 10 is available not only for Windows and macOS, but also for Linux. And remarkably, Harrison implemented Dolby Atmos in the Linux version of MixBus as well, making it the first music production environment that allows Linux musicians to work with Dolby Atmos. To prove that this actually works, let's open up MixBus 10 on a system running the latest version of Ubuntu Linux. So let's get started. Now what I have here is a vanilla installation of the latest version of Ubuntu Linux, and I've installed MixBus 10 on this system. The installation itself is very straightforward. You just download a zip file, unzip it, and then there is a script in there that you run and that installs MixBus 10. And the only thing that you have to do is when you run it for the first time, you have to put in your license key, and that's pretty much it. So let's open up MixBus 10. And I'm simply going to open up a new session. And then I'm going to select the output device. Now in our particular case, I'm going to once again choose the Rodecaster so that you guys hear what I'm doing here. Now there's one thing I'd like to mention here, and that is that in the previous videos I said that the buffer size had to be set to 512 samples. This is because Dolby Atmos requires that. However, as it turns out, and some of you have pointed it out, that MixBus is actually a little bit more flexible, so we can actually use other buffer sizes as well. So I'm going to leave it the way it is right now with 1024 samples, and that should actually work just fine. And then I'm not going to recreate the entire project. What I'm simply going to do is I'm simply going to add one audio track, and that's going to be a stereo track, and I'm going to simply add one of the loops that I have. What do I add? Maybe the synth loop. I'm going to open that and add that here. And let's move that to the start, and let's loop that. And as is the case with all other MixBus installations, all we really have to do is we have to switch on immersive panning. And as soon as I do that, I'm in Dolby Atmos mode, and the fact that this actually works, I can see by going into the mix view. And in the mix view, I now see, similar to the way it was on the Mac version or on the Windows version, doesn't really make any difference. Also here I have the Dolby Atmos bus, and I can use the immersive panner. And I will see essentially that this works in exactly the same way as it works on Windows and or Mac OS. And that is actually fairly remarkable. Now, export of Dolby Atmos master files works in exactly the same way. You just kind of go into the export and just export an immersive file, and that will produce a Dolby Atmos master file. The only disadvantage here is that on a Linux system, you don't really have any possibility to check the quality of that master file. There is no player available that allows you to read Dolby Atmos master files and play back Dolby Atmos master files, which is a little bit of a disadvantage. So you're flying blind to some extent. That is unfortunate. So if you're taking this seriously, you still probably need a Windows system or a Mac system that runs the Dolby Atmos renderer, where you can load in the final master file and just check that everything is okay. But other than that, this works actually perfectly fine, and so much so that I might actually do more Linux videos. I really started enjoying working on Linux, and this works really, really well. In conclusion, the fact that Mixbus allows users to work with Dolby Atmos on a Linux system is remarkable. I believe this is the first time a Dolby Atmos production environment has been made available to Linux musicians, and I think this is something that should be discussed more widely. However, as I mentioned before, there are still a few disadvantages when working on Linux. First of all, the internal immersive panning on Mixbus 10 does not support Atmos bad tracks, and other Atmos software solutions such as the Dolby Atmos Composer by Fiedler Audio are not available on Linux. Therefore, you are limited to using objects in Dolby Atmos. Second, there is no easy solution for playing Dolby Atmos master files on Linux. There should be a workaround using a software called Cavern, which you would have to compile yourself. I have not tested it yet, but I'm told that actually works. If this is something you're interested in, let me know in the comments, and I can make a video about that. But this is everything I wanted to say for today. Thanks again for watching my videos. I truly appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments, please use the comment section below or join us on our Discord server for a chat. And with that being said, see you all in the next video.